Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Comix Rant Mini. I'm your host, Arvin Bautista, and this is the last episode of Comix Rant Mini for the year. for the year 2024. And we are going to go over Kyle Baker's I Die at Midnight, one-shot book that was published, I think, 2000, maybe even 2001. I could be wrong, but it's very appropriate because this book occurs in 1999, and it's all about the Y2K craziness that was going on. Now I can just say, oh, it's copyright 2000, so I guess right in the 2000s is when he published this. I don't think it was, 2000. So I don't think it was actually in time for New Year's, but it's a great book. It is a really great book. Kyle Baker is this awesome artist whose stuff I got into when I read You Are Here. And I would still recommend that as the first book you should read of Kyle Baker's if you've never seen any of his stuff. He is a really good draftsman. He draws some really good stuff, but I think he's an even better storyteller. He pulls off something I don't think I have really seen. Now, there's tons of funny comics, funny gag comics and comic strips, but I don't think I've ever read any of them and actually laughed. Maybe I just don't have a sense of humor. But a lot of times it's because it's the way you pace comedy in comics. And there's like gag strips, right? Newspaper strips with even one panel gags, right? Let's say like the Far Side, and even Garfield gags, right? The Far Side, I've always found it funny, but not in the way where I'm actually laughing out loud. It is a funny strip. It's got its own kind of humor. But I think Kyle Baker is the first time I've ever seen comedy pulled off in so many levels. From being like well written, like witty comedy, witty banter, to like slapstick banter. I'm just going to flip through this out. I will go over what the plot is. I'm just going to gush about Kyle Baker a little bit here. So this book, it looks like he kind of did this super fast. And he kind of it's one of his great comedies, almost slapsticky and crazy, zany, comedy style stories. He has other books like Why I Hate Saturn and I think Uncle Wally Show. Was it Uncle Wally Show? Where it's like this a little bit more intellectual humor. Think like, what's a good way to describe those? Well, Uncle Wally is like super sarcastic and very, it got a lot of social commentary going on there. And then, Why I Hate Saturn, I think is like, it's a little tough. It's kind of like this a sitcom style thing where the characters have this Gilmore Girls banter. And a lot of his stuff anyway has that kind of banter, has that kind of humor where it's just this super fast thing. He tells his stories really differently. So when you read his comics, I think he does traditional comics too where there's word bubbles and everything. But he will do this thing where a lot of the talking is actually outside of the panel. And there are no bubbles. It's just the quote, and then that's it. And you know what's crazy is you would think you'd get lost and trying to think of who's saying what, but he has this great knack of composition and placement where these characters are standing. So if someone is talking, another person is talking, he'll break it and he'll put it on this left side, like here. This isn't even like the most amazing panel where he does this. It's just he does this so regularly that his layout is awesome. So he has like a person talking here, and then I think there's one here in the middle, and then there's one here on the right side. And the way he frames it, see, it's even out of focus. So it's almost like you're hearing this thing off screen. I think a lot of it is kind of his cinematic placement is really good, but his comics never feel like you're locked into movie panels. like as if they're like screenshots of movie panels put into one page. It feels like a comic. It still reads very much like it, and he can set up anything you can think of with this kind of compositional style. It's kind of crazy. So he will do things where like the panel, there's a character here and a character there, and maybe one character saying this on this left side and one character saying this on this right side. But he will set up the scene so that if there's a huge sequence of things like this, the characters are always clearly saying what the caption is saying underneath them. And here you have two, there's only one guy, but he will do this thing where you can kind of hear people off screen, and it's clear, like, you know, this guy's saying no, right? Because the image is very clear. It's just this very distinct knowledge of sequential art that he has. It's like innate. He just kind of speaks this way, and it's pretty amazing. It's really amazing. Just as a feat of sequential art, it's great stuff to see. So you can see there's like hijinks going on. There's like some crazy font and typography going on. And, you know, a lot of it looks dated, right? Like a lot of it, like even this cover, like what the heck? It's all just, I wish he drew it. But, you know, he's using like these 3D graphics to lay out this font. And, you know, the more I read his stuff, the more I appreciate how crazy fast he works. He works super fast. He will, and I remember at this time he's doing experimental things. Like whatever makes his life easier as a storyteller, he will do it. He will grab stock footage. He will grab stock 3D assets, lay them out, draw over them. It's really great stuff, right? Like even coloring, everything. So he was kind of doing this in the 2000s, maybe a little even earlier. And he was incorporating it into his art. And see, look at this pill bottle. That's like 3D. And then he just draws these characters. He'll always draw the characters. I don't think he ever really uses 3D for these characters. Maybe to lay it out. So he's already doing all this stuff early on. And I appreciate it more now. Maybe not necessarily the aesthetic of it, but the sheer speed that he can bust out these stories by himself, colored, lettered, everything, all by himself. And I think, you know, Kyle Baker, I think is a very, very smart man, business-wise too, because he's still an independent cartoonist, obviously. I don't know what he does nowadays, but there was definitely this time where he saw like, okay, comics, I can use these as pitch projects. But, you know, they don't read like what you would think of as pitch projects nowadays, where like if you read it, it's like, oh, this is formatted for a TV show, right? Like, and then for me, a lot of those comics fall flat. A lot, even the popular comics like that fall flat for me because they're not utilizing comics. But this is, look at this. Like right here, this is already utilizing this comic book technique where this guy just talks a lot, right? He talks a lot and he just jams like this crazy text under him and he needs to go, right? Like it's just these kind of techniques you never see when it's just strictly like, oh, I'm making a pitch doc and I want to make a movie out of it. And I know Kyle Baker also wants to do this stuff. I think he wants to do like IP stuff, pitch it, and see what happens. But at the same time, make comics out of it, like that he can actually kind of make money. He's done like stuff like King David and Nat Turner. And I think his approach was because he can sell those as historical books, right? In libraries, like the people, this was way before anybody was really thinking like this. Look at this stuff. This is cool lighting. And this is fast. This is him moving so fast, it's not even funny. Well, the story is funny. And it reads so great. Like, you might look at this page and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I gotta read all this text. But it is so fast. He writes in such a way that it's like an everyman kind of talk. And then you really do follow the beats. It's like great banter, great comedy, really quick. Here, I just saw this page. So, okay, the premise of I didn't even get into the premise of what's going on. This guy broke up with his girlfriend, and this is how we start. And he takes like these pills. He's trying to OD. He's got a suicide note, right? This is the first 3 pages. Suicide note to Muriel, and then, you know, whatever. There's some comedy going on. And then all of a sudden, somebody knocks on the door, and it turns out to be Muriel. And she wants to be taken back. After he's taken all these suicide pills and he's got the note written and everything. So now it's kind of this embarrassing situation where he just can't, it's great character, but he just cannot bring himself to admit what has happened and get help right away. So he's still trying to play it off like everything is okay because he doesn't want to lose this girl. He calls the doctor. So this is why I started laughing, was he calls the doctor. He tries to vomit, but there's silly things that happen. The sink is full of dishes. So he'd rather not vomit the suicide pills. It's just, it's funny stuff, guys. I'm like laughing throughout this whole video, but you should definitely read it and experience how it plays out. So this is why I love his stuff. His storytelling is so good that I can flip you through these panels and it's great. You can see kind of an idea of it, but it's not until you actually read it and follow the flow, like actually read this book and even like the timing of the jokes and when things are said and how panels are next to each other. It's comedy. Like, it's really good comedy. I cannot emphasize this enough on Kyle Baker's stuff. Anyway, he's doing all these silly things not to get caught trying to be found out by his girlfriend that he just took suicide pills. And then he calls his doctor and doctor's like, dude, you need to get on this right away. You need to meet me. You're going to die. Basically in a few minutes if you don't do what I'm telling you to do. And then, he's like, okay, doctor, I'm going to do what you're telling me to do. And then sure enough, we cut a whole hour or so. Right here, he's like, okay, doc, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now. And then there's like a whole time passage here with these giant clock faces. And he's like, hey, I didn't throw up. And he's all naked. He just had sex with Muriel. And you're like, oh my gosh, this guy is insane. It's already hijinks ensue right at the beginning. And it's like that for the whole book. Comedy timing is just so good. And it's like this crazy new, I'd love to see this as live action. It would be so good. If you get like this going, I think it could be like a perennial hit. Like, something that you could totally watch every New Year's. I definitely read this every New Year's because it's fun. So he's a one-man show, right? Like what I'm saying, Kyle Baker is a one-man show. He has to do all these things. So he generates this 3D, it's crazy looking, yes. But he generates this crazy 3D background so he can use and reuse it, basically move fast. So he's got like, even these are like rendered in whatever 3D software was back in the day. I don't think it was even Maya. It was probably like 3D Studio Max or something before that. And it just flows. It's just good stuff. So even when you're caught by some of these jarring things, like, oh, he's using the same image over and over, right? It's the same background over and over. It doesn't matter because his storytelling is so good. It really doesn't matter. You get the idea of what this panel is for. Okay, there's like, he just needs to set up the scene. He's right outside Times Square. There's a crowd of people. Oh yeah, they're not all detailed. Where's look at this crowd. It's just like static, some weird static thing on the ground. But you get it. You get the idea. That's why I can totally feel like, here's a shot right here. It's like a down shot, crazy shot. But this is definitely just a static texture. One flat, static plane that's on there. But it doesn't matter. You get it. He looks down. There's a bunch of people. He gets freaked out. Let's move on. Keep going. Even this is like, okay, it's like a crowd. It's supposed to be a crowd. But it looks like a circle with two eyes and static in between. Anyway, his stuff, it's still really good. I'm pointing out all these things, but I'm kind of missing on some of these great images that he has. It's fast, it's sketchy, so it's very spontaneous, and it works because there's a huge chase. It's crazy things. They're jumping out of windows, landing on things. Here it's very painfully obvious, this 3D, like it looks very low res. But there's some things that work that are interesting. So this is not the best looking, cameraman carrier. I don't know, this moving bucket. But because it's in this crazy color, yeah, it's not rendered the same way. There's a moment here where another character does something similar, but it's so distinct because the setting is set up so distinctly. Right there, right? That like, we don't have a clear shot of where this thing is. We just know it's outside the window and the guy jumped into it. There's no like establishing shot. Here's the crane. Here's everything else. But because there's this almost like shorthand for that thing, that crazy bright thing, when she jumps into it, you, in your own head, you've kind of made this picture of how these things are set up. And there's a lot of this stuff in here in this book, and it's just a really good amount of fun. Good amount of humor, good amount of self-promotion going on here, but this is some good stuff. So these are his books, Why I Hate Saturn, but he casts like Julia Roberts and Liv Tyler, as if it's like a real movie. And this You Are Here, this is the comic that I was telling you that you guys should read as your like Kyle Baker intro, with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman and some great stuff. So Stomp is like that musical in Broadway. I don't know if it's still on, but he uses these billboards as his sound effects. Genius stuff. What's going on? They're on crack, literally. And he kind of promotes his own stuff because it's the Times Square scene, but he can't really use licensed things, right? So he just does his own things, which is pretty fun. Great face. This guy is basically Nick Cage, right? Really great face, though. I mean, good stuff all around. And then there's a countdown to Happy New Year. I think that this really feels like I am there for New Year's celebrations. Anyway, there's good stuff here. Look at this panel. He just loves drawing this old granny compared to these all these other black silhouette panels at the end. And you can tell like he's just trying to finish this thing. And at this point, it doesn't matter. The storytelling is so great that it's fine. Like, it's fine that it's not this crazy detailed it's a comic book. And I feel like Kyle Baker is okay with that. And a lot with, so like other things he does, like You Are Here and King David, those are actually pretty detailed. He does like refined panels for that one. This one looks like he just went on, like, it's like a blur. He just ran through these pages and he's like pitched it to Vertigo, got it printed. And I do appreciate that because as I'm working on my own comic book, I'm just like, dude, I just gotta get it printed. I gotta get it done. I gotta pitch it somewhere and see if it works. If it doesn't, move on, right? And Kyle Baker definitely does that. He has a lot of ideas. He's going through them. At least at the time that I'm reading him, this was around early 2000s. I think You Are Here was also early 2000s. I'm not sure where he is now. He probably is working with film stuff. I think he just loves comics, so he just kind of goes back to it every now and then. I would definitely buy anything that he makes. This was only $7 back then. I think that was already fairly expensive back then, but that's almost how much an actual comic is nowadays, like a regular monthly comic. Anyway, that's Kyle Baker. I think I just blew through this episode as if I was Kyle Baker drawing this issue. Just super fast. I hope I didn't lose you guys, but at the end of it all, if you made it to the very end of this episode, I highly recommend anything that Kyle Baker has drawn. Start with You Are Here. He is a fantastic creator, and I need to see more of his stuff, to be honest. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It is New Year's Eve, and I hope you guys have a happy New Year. Don't take any of these suicide pills, or else you may have to go through this crazy rigmarole that Kyle Baker presented us with. Anyway, Happy New Year to you guys, and I will see you guys next year on Comix Rant.